1946, Webster County, Iowa. Dawn. Silas Crawford stood in his potato field watching 240 acres die. 3 weeks ago, these plants had been perfect. Vibrant green leaves catching morning light, stems thick and strong, the most promising crop he'd seen in 15 years of farming. He'd walked these rows in early April, feeling something he hadn't felt since his wife Ruth died. Hope. Now the hope was rotting in the ground. The smell hit him first. Not the clean earth scent of healthy plants, but something else. Something wrong. Acrid and sharp like meat gone bad in summer heat. He knelt beside a plant that 3 weeks ago had stood 2 feet tall, leaves spread wide to catch the sun. Now the leaves were mottled brown and yellow, curling inward like arthritic fingers. He touched a stem. It gave way under his fingers, soft and mushy, collapsing into itself. The potatoes underground would be worse. He knew without digging. Black slimy, dissolving into the soil. Inedible, worthless, late blight. Phytophthora infestans, the same disease that had killed 1 million Irish a century ago. The same disease that turned healthy crops into brown slime in a matter of days. Silas straightened up, his knees cracking. 47 years old, and he felt 70. He looked across his fields and saw death spreading in waves, brown patches expanding like oil stains on water. What had started as a few spots on lower leaves had exploded into systematic devastation. Entire rows turning brown from the inside out. Behind him, boots crunched on dry soil. Callum Brennan walked up slowly, hands shoved deep in his pockets. 52 years old, weathered face carved by decades of Iowa sun and wind. He stopped beside Silas and stared at his own fields beyond the property line. 160 acres, same brown death, same spreading destruction. Neither man spoke for a long time. Finally, Callum broke the silence. His voice came out rough, like he hadn't used it in days. "How much you got invested in this crop?" $2,800, Silas said quietly. "Seed, fertilizer, labor, equipment, maintenance, everything." "I borrowed $3,500 against the harvest. Had to repair the barn upgrade equipment." Callum paused. "Bank note comes due in October." Silas didn't need to say anything. They both knew what total crop failure meant. No harvest, no income, no way to pay mortgages, equipment loans, operating expenses. The bank would foreclose. Their families would lose everything. "Extension agent came out yesterday," Silas said. "Took samples, sent them to Iowa State." "What did they say?" "Late blight, severe infestation, no known treatment. The crops are lost." Callum's jaw tightened. "Nothing they can do. Copper sulfate spray might slow it down, won't stop it. We're looking at total crop failure." Silas pulled the letter from his pocket, read the last line again, even though he'd memorized it. "I'm sorry." 2 words that meant the end of everything. Callum turned away, stared at his own dying fields. "My grandfather came from Ireland in 1903, County Cork. He survived the tail end of the famine years barely. Used to tell me stories about the blight. Entire villages starving, bodies in ditches. Said he'd watched his own father die from eating grass because the potatoes had turned to black slime." He paused, voice tight. "Swore when he got to America he'd never plant another potato. But the soil here is perfect for them. And I thought, what are the chances lightning doesn't strike twice, right?" He laughed bitter. "Guess I was wrong." Silas thought about his wife. Ruth Crawford dead 3 years from tuberculosis. She'd gotten sick during the war, during the rationing years when food was scarce and medicine scarcer. He'd watched her waste away over 18 months, coughing blood into handkerchiefs, her body consuming itself. The doctors said if she'd had better nutrition, stronger immune system, she might have fought it off. But there hadn't been better nutrition. There'd been war rations and sacrifice and making do with less. And then she was gone. Their daughter Roslyn had been 12. Now she was 15, helping run the farm, doing the work her mother used to do. Smart girl. Clever hands. But she was still a child, and if they lost this farm, she'd lose the only home she'd ever known, the last place that still held memories of her mother. If we lose this crop, Silas said, then stopped. Couldn't finish the sentence. Callum understood anyway. Yeah. They stood together in silence, two men watching their livelihoods rot in the ground, and there was nothing either of them could do about it. The university had spoken. Modern science had declared their crops dead. The experts were never wrong. That's what Silas believed anyway. Right up until the moment the German woman spoke. 6 weeks earlier, April 1st, 1946. The military truck had pulled up to the Crawford farm at 10 in the morning, dust billowing behind it like smoke. 12 German prisoners of war climbed out, blinking in the bright Iowa sunshine. Men mostly ranging from early 20s to mid-50s. Hard workers the military liaison had promised, grateful for fair treatment, desperate to avoid being sent back to the ruins of Germany. The woman was last to step down from the truck. Margaret Steinhardt, 34 years old, though she looked older. Not from physical deterioration, but from something in her eyes, something that spoke of losses too large to name. She was average height, sturdy build, dark hair pulled back in a practical bun, work-worn hands, weathered skin. She looked like what she was, a farmer's daughter from Bavaria. Silas had been expecting only men. The presence of a woman among the prisoners surprised him. Fräulein Steinhardt, the military liaison said, consulting his clipboard. Born Bavaria, 1912. Captured during the final collapse, processed through New York, cleared for agricultural labor. He looked up at Silas. She's got farming experience. 7 generations of it, according to her intake forms. Knows crops, livestock, equipment. You can put her to work same as the others. Gretel, as she asked to be called, spoke almost no English, just enough to understand basic instructions. Silas assigned her to organize the barn, clean equipment, maintain tools. Simple work. Physical but not backbreaking. She did it without complaint. The first few weeks she was nearly invisible, quiet, respectful. She arrived at dawn, worked steadily through the day, returned to the barracks the military had set up at the edge of town. She didn't cause trouble, didn't draw attention, just worked. Silas barely noticed her. His daughter Roslyn noticed. Roslyn Crawford was 15 years old, whip-smart, with her mother's sharp eyes and her father's stubborn determination. She'd been running half the farm since she was 13, managing things her father was too grief-stricken to handle. She noticed things, details, patterns, the way Gretel's hands moved when she organized tools, the careful precision, the systematic thinking. One afternoon in late April, Roslyn found Gretel in the barn, sorting through a jumbled pile of hand tools. Hammers, wrenches, pliers, screwdrivers, all mixed together in chaos. Gretel was arranging them by type, then by size, creating a system that made sense. "That's smart," Roslyn said. Gretel looked up, startled. Her English was limited, but she understood the tone. Approval. "Thank you," she said carefully. "Did you farm in Germany?" Roslyn asked. Gretel nodded. "My family. 7 generations. Bavaria." She struggled for words. "Mountains. Potatoes. Barley vegetables. Small farm. But good soil." "What happened to it?" Gretel's face went still. "Bombs. All gone. Family." She couldn't find the English words. Made a gesture that encompassed loss too large for language. Roslyn understood. The war had taken everything from this woman. Home, family, livelihood. Everything except the knowledge in her head. "I'm sorry," Roslyn said. Gretel nodded once, then returned to sorting tools. The conversation was over, but Roslyn kept watching. She noticed how Gretel examined the potato plants when she thought no one was looking, how she knelt beside rows during her breaks, touching leaves, checking stems, studying the soil. There was expertise in those movements. Knowledge. Roslyn mentioned it to her father one evening in early May. "The German woman Gretel, she knows farming, real farming. You can see it in how she looks at the crops." Silas barely glanced up from his account books. "That's why the military sent her. Agricultural labor." "No, Dad. I mean, she really knows. The way Grandpa knew, the way you know. It's not just labor, it's understanding." Silas made a non-committal sound and returned to his calculations. He was too worried about money to pay attention. He should have listened. May 10th, 1946. Morning. Gretel Steinhardt was cleaning equipment in the barn when she smelled it. She straightened up, nose wrinkling. There, faint but distinct, coming from the direction of the potato fields. A smell she recognized immediately, even though she hadn't smelled it in 8 years. Rot. But not ordinary rot. Something specific. Something dangerous. She set down the wrench she'd been cleaning and walked toward the barn door. Stood in the opening, letting the breeze carry the scent to her. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory, words spoken in German across years and miles. When you smell the blight, child, you smell death coming. Gretel walked out into the morning sun across the yard toward the potato fields. She wasn't supposed to leave her assigned work area without permission, but something stronger than rules pulled her forward. She reached the edge of the field and stopped. Her stomach dropped. There, on the lower leaves of plants in the third row, small brown spots, maybe the size of a thumbnail, some spreading slightly edges fuzzy and indistinct. The leaves around the spots were starting to curl. The stems showed faint dark streaking. Early stage late blight. Maybe a week old. Maybe less. Gretel knelt beside a plant, touched the infected leaf gently. The tissue felt wrong under her fingers. Too soft. Breaking down from the inside. She lifted the leaf and checked the underside. White fuzzy growth in patches. Sporangia. The fungus reproducing, spreading, preparing to explode across the entire field. She stood up and looked across 240 acres of potatoes. Most of the plants still looked healthy, green and strong, growing well. But that didn't matter. Once late blight took hold, once the conditions were right, it spread like wildfire. Within days, maybe a week, this entire field would be brown and dying. She'd seen it before. Bavaria. November 1938. She'd been 26 years old. Her family's farm had been small, carved into the mountainside over generations. 70 acres total, maybe 20 planted in potatoes. That year, late blight had come early and hard. The worst outbreak in 50 years, people said. It tore through the region like a plague. Gretel remembered standing in her family's field with her grandmother, watching their neighbors' crops die. The Hoffman's farm, just over the hill. One week the plants were healthy. The next week everything was brown and rotting. The Hoffmans had lost 100% of their potato crop. That winter 3 of their children starved to death. Klaus Hoffmann, 8 years old, Margareta 6, baby Johann 2. Gretel remembered their faces, remembered the funeral. 3 small coffins in frozen ground. But the Steinhardt family hadn't lost their crop. They'd saved 80% of it. Enough to eat through the winter, enough to survive. Because Gretel's grandmother, Frieda Steinhardt, knew a way. Frieda had been 66 years old in 1938, small and wiry and sharp as a blade. She'd learned potato farming from her grandmother, who'd learned it from hers back through generations to the early 1700s. The knowledge was old, older than universities, older than modern agriculture. When the blight came in 1938, Frieda had gone to the root cellar and pulled out a notebook. Handwritten pages yellowed with age. Her grandmother's handwriting spidery and faded. "This is what we do when the blight comes," she'd said. "This is how we survive." Gretel had helped her grandmother apply the treatment. Mixed the ingredients, prepared the solution, sprayed every plant, top and bottom of every leaf. It had taken 3 days of dawn to dusk work. Backbreaking labor. But it had worked. The blight had stopped spreading. The plants had recovered. The Steinhardt family had harvested 80% of their crop, while their neighbors harvested nothing. Gretel had written down the formula herself, copied it from her grandmother's notebook. She'd memorized the proportions, the technique, the timing. And then the war had come. The bombs. The destruction. Her grandmother's house collapsing in fire and rubble, Frieda inside it. Her parents, her siblings scattered or dead. The farm reduced to a crater. everything gone. But Gretel still had the knowledge. Standing in an Iowa potato field on May 10, 1946, she could see the blight spreading just like it had spread in Bavaria 8 years ago. She knew what was coming: total crop failure, financial ruin for this family, for their neighbors, and she knew how to stop it. But she was a prisoner, a German, a woman. She had no standing to tell American farmers how to manage their crops. The university extension agents were the experts here, the agricultural scientists with their degrees and laboratories and modern methods. Who was she to contradict them? Gretel stood at the edge of the field for a long time, internal war raging. Her grandmother's voice in her memory. Knowledge that saves lives belongs to everyone who needs it, child, not just to us. She made her decision. May 10th, 1946. Afternoon. Silas Crawford was in the machine shed trying to repair a cultivator blade when Gretel appeared in the doorway. "Mr. Crawford, sir." He looked up surprised. The German woman had never initiated conversation before. "Yes. May I speak with you about the potato fields?" Something in her tone made him set down his tools. "What about them?" "I have seen something. In the plants. Early signs of disease." She struggled with the English words. "Very dangerous disease. If not stopped, all plants will die." Silas felt his stomach tighten. "What kind of disease?" Gretel searched for the word. "In German we call it Krautfäule. I do not know English word, but it is very bad. Kills potatoes very fast." "Late blight." She nodded quickly. "Yes, late blight. I have seen this before. In Bavaria. Very dangerous." Silas thought about the extension agent's visit, the samples taken, the university's verdict. The extension agent already came out, took samples. They'll let me know if there's anything to worry about. "Mr. Crawford, please." Gretel stepped forward, urgent. "This disease spreads very fast. In 1 week, maybe less, all plants will be dying. If you wait for university, it will be too late. The university has experts, trained agronomists. They'll know what to do." "But Mr. Crawford, I know this disease. I have seen it kill entire crops. I have seen families starve because of it." Her voice was steady but intense. "I have also seen it stopped. My family, we had a way, an old way, from many generations. It works." Silas studied her face. She believed what she was saying, absolutely believed it. "What way?" "My grandmother's method. From her grandmother back many years. When late blight comes, there is a treatment. Special mixture. It stops the blight, saves the crop." Silas felt skepticism rising. "A folk remedy?" "Not folk remedy. Is real treatment. I have seen it work. In 1938, late blight came to Bavaria. Very bad. Worst in 50 years. My neighbor's farm, they lost everything. 100% of crop dead. That winter, 3 of their children starved." Her voice didn't waver, but her eyes held old pain. "My family used grandmother's method. We saved 80% of our crop. We lived. They died. The only difference was the treatment." Silas wanted to believe her, but folk remedies and old wives' tales weren't science. The university would send their verdict. If there was really blight, they'd recommend proper treatment. "I appreciate you telling me," he said carefully, "but I think I'd better wait to hear from the extension office. They're the experts." Gretel's face fell slightly. She nodded once, formal. "Yes, Mr. Crawford, I understand." She turned to leave. "Wait." She stopped. "This treatment your grandmother used, what's in it?" Gretel turned back. "Wood ash, lime, sulfur, milk. Milk. Milk that is starting to sour, not rotten but turning." She saw his expression. "I know it sounds strange, but it works. The combination, it does 3 things. Kills the fungus spores, changes the leaf surface, helps the plant defend itself. And you've seen this work. Many times. Not just 1938. Other years also. Always it works. If caught early. If done correctly." Silas thought about his dying investment. His daughter's future. The mortgage. Ruth's memory. "Let me think about it," he said finally. Gretel nodded and left. Silas stood in the machine shed, cultivator, forgotten, mind-churning. 2 days later, the letter came from Iowa State University. Vincent Morris, the county extension agent, delivered it personally. Stood in Silas's kitchen with his hat in his hands, face grave. The samples came back. It's late blight confirmed, Phytophthora infestans, early stage but spreading fast. Silas felt the floor drop out from under him. What can we do? Copper sulfate spray might slow the progression. But Silas, I have to be honest with you. The university says once late blight takes hold like this, there's no stopping it. You're looking at significant crop loss, maybe total crop failure. Vincent nodded slowly. I'm sorry. The letter recommends you start planning for next season. Focus on preventing it from spreading to your other fields. But this potato crop, he didn't finish. Didn't need to. Silas sat down heavily. $2,800. Gone. The mortgage payment. Gone. Everything. Vincent put a hand on his shoulder. I know this is hard, but you're not alone. Callum's fields are showing the same symptoms. It's hitting both of you. After Vincent left, Silas sat at his kitchen table for a long time staring at the letter. The official university letterhead. The professional language. The death sentence. Your crops are finished. Roslyn came in from the barn, saw her father's face, read the letter over his shoulder. What are you going to do? I don't know. She was quiet for a moment. Then, what did the German woman say when she came to talk to you? Silas looked up. How did you know about that? I saw her. She looked worried. What did she say? Silas told her. The late blight warning, the grandmother's method, wood ash, lime, sulfur milk, the claims about Bavaria, 1938. Roslyn listened carefully. Do you believe her? I don't know. The university says nothing can stop it. The university said Mum might recover too. Roslyn's voice was quiet. They were wrong then. Silas looked at his daughter. 15 years old and already learning that experts didn't have all the answers. That sometimes the people who were supposed to know let you down. I'll talk to Callum, he said. May 11th, 1946. Evening. Callum Brennan's kitchen. 3 people around a scarred wooden table. Silas, Callum, and Gretel. Gretel had brought materials. A bucket of wood ash from Silas's fireplace. A container of hydrated lime from the barn supply, a bag of sulfur powder purchased from the feed store, several glass jars. She laid them out on the table like a surgeon preparing instruments. This is what my grandmother called the 3-part blessing, she said, speaking slowly so they could understand her accented English. Ash, lime, and sulfur, mixed in exact proportions, applied correctly, stops the blight. Callum frowned at the materials. Sulfur, sure. That's basic fungicide. Agricultural sulfur's been used for decades, but ash and lime, that just sounds like folk remedy nonsense. Gretel met his eyes steadily. Not folk remedy. Chemistry. My grandmother, she did not know chemistry words. She could not explain why it works, but she knew that it works. How? Silas asked. Gretel began measuring. Her hands moved with practiced confidence, scooping and leveling with precision. Sulfur kills the fungus spores. This science knows. But sulfur alone is not enough. Lime, it changes the surface of the leaf, makes it hostile to the fungus, changes the acid level, makes hard for fungus to grow. She paused, searching for words. And ash. Ash contains minerals. Potassium, calcium, phosphorus. These strengthen the plant's own defenses, help the plant fight back. She measured carefully. 3 parts wood ash, 2 parts hydrated lime, 1 part sulfur powder. The proportions must be exact, she said. Too much sulfur burns the plants, too much lime changes the soil too fast, too much ash, the treatment is weak. The mixture turned a pale grey-green color as she combined the powders in a glass jar. The smell was sharp mineral, slightly acrid. Callum leaned closer, skeptical, but interested despite himself. "Where did your grandmother learn this?" "From her grandmother, who learned from hers, back and back maybe 200 years or more." Gretel's voice carried certainty. "In Bavaria, late blight has come many times over the centuries. The farmers who knew this method, they survived. The farmers who did not know, they starved." She reached for a pitcher of milk that had been sitting out for 12 hours, just starting to turn. "Now comes important part. This powder, it must be mixed with water and milk." "Milk." Callum's skepticism sharpened. "You want to spray milk on my crops?" "Not fresh milk. Milk that is beginning to sour." "The sourness is important." She poured carefully. "The sour milk, it contains bacteria, lactic acid bacteria. These do two things. First, they help the treatment stick to the leaves, make a coating that does not wash away in rain. Second, the bacteria themselves, they create small amount of acid. This helps the sulfur work better." She mixed 1 cup of the powder combination with 1 gallon of water, then added 1 cup of the sour milk. The result was a cloudy grey liquid with a faint, earthy smell. "This is sprayed on every plant, every leaf top and bottom, every stem. Complete coverage." She looked between them. "In Bavaria, when we did this, it took 3 days for our whole farm. Dawn to dusk. Hard work. But it saved our crop." Silas stared at the mixture. It looked ridiculous, primitive, like something from a century ago. But Gretel's eyes held absolute conviction. "How do we know this works?" he asked. Gretel's voice was quiet but firm. "Because I have seen it work. Not once, many times. My family survived because of this. Our neighbors did not. I watched 3 children die that winter because their parents did not know this method. Klaus, 8 years old, Margareta, 6, baby Johann, 2. I remember their names. I remember their faces." She paused. "Mr. Crawford, Mr. Brennan, the university says your crops will die. Modern science says nothing can save them. Maybe they are right. Maybe this old method does not work in America. But in Bavaria it worked always, every time. And I am standing here telling you I have seen it with my own eyes." Callum and Silas looked at each other. "What's it cost?" Callum asked finally. "Materials may be $40 total for sulfur. Ash is free from your fireplaces. Lime you already have. Milk?" Gretel shrugged. "Cheap. Labor. I will help. The other prisoners, if you ask, they will help also. We can spray 400 acres in 1 day if we work hard." Silas did the math in his head. $40 versus $2,800 invested. 1 day of labor versus total crop loss. "The university says it's impossible," he said. "The university is not standing here watching their family farm die," Gretel replied. Callum stood up, walked to his kitchen window, stared out at his dying fields. His grandfather's voice echoed in his mind. Stories about the Irish famine, about potato crops turning to black slime, about families eating grass because there was nothing else. Never ignore potato knowledge, his grandfather had said, no matter where it comes from. Callum turned back to the table. "I'm in," he said. "I'd rather try something and fail than give up without fighting." Silas thought about Ruth, about Roslyn, about the farm that was the last piece of his wife's memory. "Fine," he said. "We'll try it, starting tomorrow morning." Gretel's face lit up with relief. "You will not regret this, Mr. Crawford, I promise you." "We'd better not," Silas said. But despite everything, despite his skepticism and fear, he felt something he hadn't felt since the blight appeared. Hope. May 11th, 1946, late evening. After Gretel left, Silas and Callum sat at the table staring at the jar of grey mixture. "We're betting everything on a German grandmother's kitchen recipe," Callum said. "Yep." "Against the advice of university agricultural departments." "Yep." Callum was quiet for a moment. Then he laughed short and bitter. "My grandfather would love this. Irishman trusting a German to save his potatoes. Hell of a thing." Silas picked up the jar, held it to the light. The mixture looked harmless, almost foolish. Wood ash and sour milk. Could something this simple really work when modern science said nothing could? What if she's wrong? He asked quietly. Then we're no worse off than we already are. University said the crops are dead anyway. What if she's right and we didn't try? That was the real question, the one that would haunt them if they did nothing. Callum stood up. Dawn tomorrow. Get your prisoners ready. I'll get mine. We'll mix this stuff and spray until we can't lift our arms. After Callum left, Silas sat alone in the kitchen. He pulled out the university letter again, read the final line. We recommend you accept the loss and begin planning for next season. He thought about Gretel's face when she'd described the Hoffman children. 3 small coffins. The certainty in her voice when she'd said the treatment worked. He thought about his daughter upstairs, sleeping in the house her mother had died in, trusting her father to keep their home safe. Silas folded the letter and put it away. Tomorrow they'd find out if a German grandmother's 200-year-old recipe could beat modern science. Tomorrow they'd find out if desperate men and ancient knowledge could save what the experts had declared lost. Tomorrow, either everything would change or everything would end. Silas went to bed but didn't sleep, just lay in the darkness listening to the house settle, thinking about ash and lime and sulphur and sour milk, and wondering if he was the biggest fool in Iowa or the luckiest man alive. He'd find out in 3 days. May 12th, 1946. 5 in the morning. 20 German prisoners assembled in Silas Crawford's barn. Gretel stood before them, speaking rapid German, explaining the mixture, the proportions, the application method. They listened intently, asked questions, nodded understanding. Every prisoner volunteered to work extra hours, no additional pay requested. These farms had treated them fairly, fed them well, respected them. If the crops failed, the prisoners might be sent elsewhere, to farms that weren't so kind. Saving the crops meant staying where they were treated like human beings instead of defeated enemies. Gretel divided them into teams. Each team assigned specific rows. Each person given a hand sprayer shown exactly how to apply the mixture, top and bottom of every leaf, every stem, every plant, complete coverage. The work began at sunrise. Silas stood at the edge of his field and watched 20 people move through the rows with systematic efficiency. They worked in silence, mostly focused, methodical. The mixture went on wet and grey. Within minutes it began to dry, leaving a pale, whitish coating on the plants, like frost, like hope. Roslyn worked alongside them, her young back bent over plants, sprayer in hand. She'd insisted. This was her farm too, her future. By noon, they'd covered 80 acres. By sunset, both farms were completely treated. 400 acres coated in Gretel's ancient Bavarian mixture. Every plant, every leaf. The mixture dried to a ghostly white coating that made the fields look like they'd been touched by winter. Silas stood at the field edge that evening, exhausted hands cramping from carrying buckets and mixing solutions. Gretel stood beside him, equally tired, sweat-stained and dirt-smudged. "Now what?" he asked. "Now we wait. 3 days you will see the blight stop spreading. 7 days you will see plants begin to recover. 14 days you will know if the crop is saved." "You sound very certain." "Because I have seen it before." She turned to look at him directly. "Mr. Crawford, I know you doubt. I know the university says impossible, but my grandmother was not wrong. This works. You will see." A car drove past on the road, slowed, stopped. Vincent Morris got out, walked toward them, staring at the white-coated fields. "Silas," he said slowly, "what in God's name did you do to your crops?" Silas felt his jaw tighten. Something desperate. Something the university said was impossible. Vincent walked closer, examined a coated plant, rubbed a leaf between his fingers. The white powder came off on his skin. This is the folk remedy, the German woman's grandmother's recipe." "Yes. Silas, we talked about this. The university was very clear. Late blight can't be stopped with folk treatments. The university was also very clear that my crops are dead. So what exactly do I have to lose? Vincent opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. Couldn't argue with that logic. When will you know if it works? He asked instead. 3 days, Gretel said quietly. The blight will stop spreading, or it will not. Vincent looked at her, really looked at her for the first time, saw the certainty in her eyes, the knowledge. You really believe this works? I know this works. I have seen it save crops when experts said nothing could be done. Vincent was quiet for a long moment. Then he sighed. Fine. 3 days. But Silas, when this doesn't work, please don't say I didn't warn you. He drove away. Silas turned back to his ghostly white fields, 400 acres coated in hope and desperation. This better work, he said quietly. Gretel didn't answer, just stood beside him as the sun set, painting the white-coated plants in shades of gold and orange. 3 days. In 3 days they'd know if ancient knowledge could beat modern science. In 3 days they'd know if Gretel Steinhardt's grandmother had been a genius or a fool. In 3 days everything would change, one way or another. May 13th, 1946. Webster County Extension Office. Noon. Vincent Morris sat at his desk, eating a sandwich he couldn't taste, thinking about Silas Crawford's white-coated potato fields. The image wouldn't leave his mind. 400 acres covered in wood ash and sour milk, like some medieval remedy applied to modern farmland. It was insane. The university had been crystal clear. Late blight, once established, couldn't be stopped. Not with folk treatments. Not with anything short of complete crop destruction and soil fumigation. And yet, Vincent had seen Gretel Steinhardt's face, the absolute certainty in her eyes. Not hope, not wishful thinking, knowledge. He finished his sandwich and pulled out his records. Found the contact information for Dr. Theodore Ashford at Iowa State, head of the plant pathology department, the leading expert on potato diseases in the entire Midwest. Vincent picked up the phone. The call connected after 3 rings. Dr. Ashford speaking. Theodore, it's Vincent Morris, Webster County Extension Agent. I need to run something by you. It's about those late blight samples I sent last week. Ah, yes. The Crawford and Brennan farms. Severe infestation, early stage, but spreading rapidly. Did you deliver my recommendations? I did, but there's been a development. Vincent paused. The farmers decided to try an alternative treatment. Alternative? What kind of alternative? A folk remedy. Traditional Bavarian method, apparently. Combination of wood ash, hydrated lime sulfur powder and sour milk. They've coated their entire 400 acres with it. Silence on the other end of the line. Then Dr. Ashford spoke, voice carefully controlled. Vincent, please tell me you're joking. I wish I were. They covered 400 acres of infected potato plants with wood ash and sour milk, based on what old wives' tales. Based on advice from a German prisoner of war, woman named Margaret Steinhardt, says her grandmother used this method in Bavaria, saved their crops during a major blight outbreak in 1938. Another pause. Longer this time. Vincent, I'm going to say this as clearly as I can. What those farmers have done is agricultural suicide. Late blight cannot be stopped with folk remedies. The science is unambiguous. I told them that, showed them your letter. They did it anyway. Dr. Ashford's voice sharpened. Then they're fools. And you need to document this failure carefully so other farmers don't make the same mistake. The German woman seemed very certain it would work. I'm sure she did. Anecdotal evidence always feels certain to the person offering it, but certainty is not the same as scientific validity. Dr. Ashford shifted into lecture mode. Let me explain exactly why this treatment cannot possibly work. Vincent grabbed a pencil, started taking notes. Late blight is caused by Phytophthora infestans, an oomycete pathogen.
It reproduces through sporangia that spread rapidly in moist conditions. The spores penetrate plant tissue through stomata and wounds. Once inside, the mycelium spreads systemically through the plant's vascular system. Vincent wrote quickly, trying to keep up. Modern copper-based fungicides work by creating a toxic barrier on the leaf surface that kills spores before they can penetrate.
They're effective because copper ions disrupt the spore's cellular metabolism at the point of contact. Right. Now this folk remedy. Let's break it down. First, sulfur. Yes, elemental sulfur has some limited antifungal properties. But here's the problem. Sulfur's effectiveness is pH dependent. It works best in acidic conditions. When you add hydrated lime to the mixture, you're raising the pH to extremely alkaline levels, probably 12 or 13 on the pH scale. Vincent underlined that. So the lime neutralizes the sulfur. Exactly. The alkalinity creates a chemical environment that severely compromises the sulfur's antifungal activity. They've essentially cancelled out their only active ingredient. What about the wood ash? Wood ash contains potassium, calcium, some phosphorus. These are plant nutrients, helpful for soil amendment over time, but they have zero proven effect on fungal pathology. The idea that ash somehow activates plant defenses is agricultural mysticism, not science. Vincent kept writing. His sandwich sat heavy in his stomach. And the milk. Dr. Ashford's tone suggested he found this particularly absurd. Sour milk contains lactic acid bacteria, lactobacillus species primarily. These bacteria do have antimicrobial properties, but against other bacteria, not fungal pathogens. And even if they had antifungal properties, which they don't, bacterial cultures exposed to outdoor conditions die within hours. UV radiation, temperature fluctuations, desiccation, all lethal to bacterial colonies. Vincent finished writing. The science was airtight. Absolutely airtight. So there's no mechanism by which this treatment could work. None whatsoever. In fact, I'd argue it might make things worse. The organic material, the milk proteins, could potentially provide additional nutrients for the pathogen, and the alkaline pH might stress the plants further. Vincent set down his pencil.
The farmers seem convinced it will work. The German woman was very specific, said they'd see the blight stop spreading in 3 days. Dr. Ashford laughed, not cruelly, but with the tired amusement of an expert who'd heard every folk remedy imaginable. Vincent, I've been studying plant pathology for 30 years. I've heard every folk cure, every traditional treatment, every grandmother's secret recipe. And I can tell you with absolute certainty, late blight does not stop spreading because you put wood ash on it. That's not how fungal pathogens work. I understand. When this treatment fails, and it will fail, those farmers need to accept reality and focus on next season's planning. File insurance claims if they have coverage. But pursuing ineffective folk remedies will only waste time and money. Vincent thought about Silas Crawford's face, the desperate hope, the willingness to try anything. What should I do? Document everything.
Take samples in 3 days. Show them the continued progression. Sometimes people need to see failure with their own eyes before they'll accept expert advice. After the call ended, Vincent sat at his desk for a long time, staring at his notes. The science was clear. The expert was certain. And yet, Gretel Steinhardt's eyes had held something Vincent couldn't quite dismiss. Not hope. Something harder. Something like knowledge earned through experience rather than learned from books. He shook his head. He was being foolish. Dr. Ashford had a PhD, 30 years of research, laboratory equipment, scientific method. Gretel had a grandmother's notebook and anecdotal evidence. Science would win. Science always won. Vincent put his notes in the Crawford file and tried to forget about it. But he couldn't quite shake the image of those white-coated fields. 400 acres of desperate hope waiting to be proven wrong. May 14th, 1946, 2 p.m. Silas Crawford sat in Vincent Morris's office with Callum Brennan waiting for the phone call. Vincent had arranged it the day before. A conference call with Dr. Theodore Ashford himself, the leading expert, the man who would explain scientifically and definitively why Gretel's treatment couldn't possibly work.
Silas hadn't told Gretel about the call, didn't want her to know he was still doubting, still questioning. The phone rang. Vincent answered, then motioned them closer. "Dr. Ashford, I have the farmers here, Silas Crawford and Callum Brennan." The speaker crackled to life. Dr. Ashford's voice came through cultured and authoritative. "Gentlemen, thank you for taking my call. Vincent has informed me of the situation. I understand you've applied a traditional treatment to your late blight infection based on advice from a German prisoner." "That's right," Silas said. "I appreciate your desperation. Crop failure is devastating financially and emotionally.
But I need to explain to you as clearly and scientifically as I can why this treatment cannot work."
For the next 15 minutes, Dr. Ashford delivered the same lecture he'd given Vincent. The biology of Phytophthora infestans, the mechanism of modern fungicides, the chemical reasons why ash, lime, sulfur and milk couldn't possibly stop late blight. Silas listened, his hope deflating with every sentence. The science was overwhelming, irrefutable. Dr. Ashford didn't sound like a man guessing. He sounded like a man who knew with absolute certainty exactly how potato blight worked and why Gretel's method was impossible. The alkalinity from the lime neutralizes the sulfur's effectiveness, Dr. Ashford explained patiently. You've created a chemical environment that actually prevents your only active ingredient from working. It's like trying to fight a fire by pouring water and gasoline on it simultaneously. They cancel each other out. Callum shifted in his chair. Silas could feel his neighbour's confidence crumbling. "But what if generations of Bavarian farmers found it worked?" Callum asked, voice tight. "Wouldn't that count for something?" "That counts as anecdotal evidence, Mr. Brennan, not scientific proof. Correlation is not causation. If Bavarian farms survived blight outbreaks, it was likely due to factors you can't see. Crop rotation, resistant potato varieties, favorable weather conditions, not magic potions made from fireplace ash." The words hit like hammer blows. Magic potions, fireplace ash, folk superstition. "What about the milk?" Silas asked quietly. Dr. Ashford's tone suggested he found this question particularly absurd. "The milk is the most problematic element, actually. Sour milk contains lactic acid bacteria. These have some antimicrobial properties in dairy products, yes. But against other bacteria, not plant pathogens. Zero proven effect on fungi."
"And the bacteria themselves?" "They die within hours of outdoor application. UV light temperature changes, moisture loss, all kill bacterial cultures rapidly." He paused. "Gentlemen, I understand this woman was convincing. Personal experience often is. But personal experience is not the same as scientific validity. If her family's farm survived in Bavaria, I'm genuinely glad for them. But survival doesn't prove causation. There could have been a dozen other factors at play." Silas felt something cold settling in his chest, not just doubt anymore, something heavier, the creeping certainty that he'd made a terrible mistake. Vincent spoke up. "Dr. Ashford, I should mention that I independently sent samples to the University of Wisconsin and the University of Minnesota as well. Both have confirmed your analysis. All 3 universities agree this treatment has no scientific basis. 3 universities. 3 independent confirmations. All saying the same thing impossible, Doctor." Ashford's voice carried a note of finality. 3 separate plant pathology departments, gentlemen, using the same scientific methods, arriving at the same conclusion. This should tell you something." Silas looked at Callum. His neighbour's face had gone grey. "So, we've wasted 3 days," Callum said quietly. "I'm afraid so. My professional recommendation remains the same. Accept the loss, file insurance claims, focus on preventing spread to your other fields, and planning for next season." The call ended. The office fell into heavy silence. Vincent looked at them both with something like pity. "I'm sorry, Silas." "Callum, I tried to warn you." Silas stood up slowly. His legs felt weak. $2,800. Gone. Wasted on a German woman's grandmother's fairy tale while the real crops continued dying. "When the treatment fails," Vincent said gently, "come back. We'll figure out the next steps together. Outside, the afternoon sun felt too bright, harsh.
Callum caught up to Silas in the parking area.
3 universities, Silas.
I heard. 3, all saying the same thing.
I know. Callum's hands were shaking. Maybe we should stop, pull the workers off, focus on salvaging what we can from the other fields. Silas thought about Gretel's face, the certainty in her voice. I have seen it work. But against that 3 universities, 3 PhDs, decades of combined research experience. Who was he supposed to believe, a prisoner of war with a grandmother's recipe, or the leading scientific minds in the Midwest? I need to talk to her, Silas said. He found Gretel in the barn cleaning equipment. She looked up when he entered, and something in his face made her set down her tools. You have spoken with the university, she said. Not a question. 3 universities. All of them say it's impossible, that the science doesn't support it, that we've wasted our time. Gretel nodded slowly. No surprise. She'd expected this.
And now you doubt?
Yes.
She met his eyes directly. I understand, Mr. Crawford. You trust science? You trust universities? You trust experts with degrees and laboratories? This is smart. This is right. But sometimes experts do not know everything. Her voice remained calm, patient. Sometimes knowledge exists outside universities. My grandmother could not explain why the treatment worked. She did not know words like pH or alkalinity or fungicidal activity. She could not write scientific papers. Gretel picked up a wrench, turned it over in her hands. She just knew it worked. Always, every time she tried it. Dr. Ashford explained exactly why it can't work. The chemistry, the biology. It was very convincing. I am sure it was. Your doctor is very educated, very knowledgeable. But Mr. Crawford, his knowledge comes from books and laboratories. My grandmother's knowledge came from watching crops die or live.
From burying neighbors' children or feeding her own. She set down the wrench. In 1938, the experts in Bavaria also said nothing could stop the blight. The agricultural ministry sent letters, very official, very scientific. They said the crops were lost, farmers should accept it and plan for next year. What happened? The farmers who listened to the experts buried their children that winter. The farmers who remembered the old ways buried their potatoes and lived. Silas wanted to believe her. God, how he wanted to believe her. But 3 universities. How can you be so certain when 3 PhDs say you're wrong? Gretel's voice didn't rise, but it hardened with conviction. Because I was there, Mr. Crawford. I did not read about it in a book. I did not study it in a laboratory. I stood in a field and watched my neighbor's children starve. Klaus Hoffmann, 8 years old, so thin at the end his bones showed through his skin. Margaret, 6.
Cried for food until she was too weak to cry. Baby Johann, too, died in his mother's arms. Her eyes held old pain, but her voice stayed steady. I remember their faces. I remember carrying tiny coffins in frozen ground. I remember my neighbor's wife screaming at my grandmother, asking why we had food, and her babies had none. She paused. My grandmother showed her the notebook, explained the treatment, offered to teach her for next year. But there was no next year for those children. They were already dead. Silas felt something crack in his chest. The only difference between my family and theirs was the treatment. The only difference between living and dying was knowledge my grandmother's grandmother brought from Ireland during the famine. Knowledge the experts called superstition. She looked at him directly. Your doctor explains why it should not work based on his understanding. But Mr. Crawford, his understanding is incomplete.
There is something in the combination he does not see. Something the old farmers knew but could not name. What? I do not know the science words, but I know the effect. Sulfur kills spores, both my grandmother and your doctor agree on this. Lime changes the leaf surface, makes it hostile to fungus. My grandmother saw this happen, could not explain the mechanism, but saw the result. Ash contains minerals that do something to the plant, strengthen it, help it defend itself. And the milk,
The sour milk it makes everything stick together, helps it penetrate the leaf tissue. Her certainty was absolute. Tomorrow is the third day, Mr. Crawford. The blight will stop spreading or it will not. In 3 more days, you will see recovery or you will not. In 14 days total, you will know if my grandmother was a genius or if your doctor was right. Silas studied her face. No desperation there, no hope, just knowledge earned through experience.
What if you're wrong? Then I will apologize for giving you false hope and wasting your time. But Mr. Crawford, I am not wrong. I have seen this work too many times to doubt it. Silas left the barn, mind churning. That evening he sat at his kitchen table with Roslyn, told her about the phone call, the 3 universities, the scientific explanations. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "I don't know." Roslyn was quiet for a moment. Then, "Dad, remember when Mum was sick? Dr. Patterson said she might recover, that the new medicine might work. He was so certain." Silas felt the old wound open. She died anyway. Right. The expert was wrong. His certainty didn't change reality. She paused. "We've already applied the treatment. The crops are either going to survive or die regardless of what the universities say. So what does it cost us to wait 3 days and see—" "My sanity," Silas muttered. But she was right. 3 days. Then they'd know. He went to bed that night with Dr. Ashford's lecture echoing in his mind, fighting with Gretel's quiet certainty. Science versus experience. Experts versus tradition. Modern knowledge versus ancient wisdom. Tomorrow was day 3. Tomorrow the blight would either stop spreading or it wouldn't. Tomorrow Silas Crawford would find out if he was the biggest fool in Iowa, or if a German grandmother from Bavaria had known something the universities didn't. He didn't sleep, just lay in the darkness thinking about Klaus and Margareta and baby Johann Hoffmann dead in Bavaria, winter 1938, and about 3 universities saying impossible, and about Gretel Steinhardt's eyes holding certainty like iron. Tomorrow. Everything would change tomorrow. One way or another. May 15th, 1946. Dawn. Silas Crawford walked through his potato field before sunrise flashlight beam cutting through pre-dawn darkness. He hadn't slept more than an hour. Doctor. Ashford's lecture kept replaying in his mind. The confident dismissal, the scientific certainty, 3 universities all saying the same thing. Impossible. He found a plant he'd marked 3 days ago, tagged it with string so he could track its progression. On May 12th, this plant had shown approximately 30% brown damage. Leaves curling at the edges, brown spots spreading across the tissue. Dark lesions streaking up the stem. Clearly dying. Silas knelt beside it now, hands shaking slightly. Aimed his flashlight at the leaves. The brown areas were still there. Same size, same shape. The damage from 3 days ago frozen in place. But no new brown spots, no new lesions. The spreading had stopped. Silas leaned closer, touching each leaf carefully. The infected tissue felt dead papery, but the healthy tissue around it felt firm, alive. The brown patches hadn't grown at all. He moved to the next plant. Same thing. Old damage visible. No new damage. Next plant. Same. His heart started pounding. He began to run, moving through the rows, checking plant after plant after plant. The flashlight beam jerked and swayed as he moved. Each plant showed the same pattern. Blight damage from 3 days ago still present but not spreading, frozen in place like a photograph. The infection had stopped. Completely stopped. Just like Gretel said it would. Silas dropped to his knees in the dirt, flashlight falling from his hand. He put his face in his hands and tried to breathe. 3 universities had said this was impossible. The leading expert in the Midwest had explained scientifically and definitively why this treatment couldn't work. And yet the blight had stopped spreading. Footsteps behind him. Running. Callum Brennan appeared breathless, wild-eyed. "Silas, Silas, my fields. The blight. It stopped. It stopped spreading." Silas looked up at his neighbour. "Mine too." They stood together in the middle of 400 acres of potato plants that should have been dying but weren't. The white coating from Gretel's treatment had mostly worn off, washed away by rain and irrigation. But something had changed in the plants themselves. Something fundamental. The blight had stopped. "How?" Callum whispered. "3 universities said it was impossible." "I know." Dr. Ashford explained exactly why it couldn't work. "I know." "So how?" Silas shook his head. "I don't know. But it stopped." He found Gretel in the barn 20 minutes later. She was preparing for the day's work, organizing tools with her usual methodical precision. "It stopped," Silas said. She looked up unsurprised. "Yes, I told you it would." "How did you know? How could you be so certain when the experts said it was impossible?" Gretel set down the wrench she'd been holding. "Mr. Crawford's science explains how things work, but experience proves they work. Sometimes experience comes first, understanding comes later." "But 3 universities?" "3 universities studied the treatment in theory. I have seen it work in practice. Theory is important, but reality is more important." She returned to organizing tools, calm as still water. Silas stood there for a moment, mind reeling. Then he went to find Vincent Morris. May 16th, 1946, morning after the discovery. Word spread through Webster County like wildfire. The blight had stopped. Silas Crawford's phone rang 6 times before breakfast. Farmers from neighboring counties. The feed store owner. 2 reporters from the Des Moines Register who'd somehow heard about the German woman's miracle cure. Callum Brennan showed up at dawn, grinning like a fool. "My phone won't stop ringing," he said. "Everyone wants to know about the treatment. Muller from 3 farms over, he's got early blight showing up. Wants to try it." Silas looked out at his fields. The white coating had mostly washed away, but the plants looked different now. Stronger somehow. Like they'd survived something that should have killed them and come out harder for it. "We'd better talk to Gretel," he said. Vincent Morris arrived at noon, skeptical and wary. He'd heard Silas's excited phone call, didn't quite believe it. He walked through both farms for 2 hours, examining hundreds of plants, taking samples with meticulous care. When he finally straightened up, his face had gone pale. "This is incredible," he said quietly. "The blight progression has completely halted." "Does that mean the crops are saved?" Callum asked. Vincent hesitated. "It means they're not getting worse. But the damaged tissue is still damaged. The question now is whether the plants can recover, whether they can generate enough new growth to produce a viable harvest." "Gretel said we'd see recovery starting on day 7, Silas said. Vincent looked skeptical. "That would require the plants to regenerate damaged leaf tissue, to grow new material from stressed stems. Theoretically, plants can do that, but with this level of systemic stress—" He trailed off. "Let's wait and see," Silas said firmly. Vincent took his samples and drove back to the extension office in silence. His hands gripped the steering wheel too tight. His mind churned. The blight had stopped spreading. 3 universities had said this was impossible. Dr. Theodore Ashford, the leading expert in the entire Midwest, had explained scientifically why it couldn't work. And yet it had worked. Vincent sat in his office for an hour staring at the samples. Then he picked up the phone. Dr. Ashford answered on the second ring. "Theodore, it's Vincent Morris again. I need to report something you're not going to believe." "What happened?" "The blight stopped spreading, on both farms, 400 acres. The progression has completely halted." Silence on the other end of the line. Then Dr. Ashford's voice, carefully controlled. "That's not possible." "I examined the plants myself. Took samples. The infection damage from 3 days ago is still present, but it hasn't grown. No new lesions, no new brown spots. It's like someone hit pause on the disease progression." Vincent late blight doesn't just stop spreading. Not on its own, not without intervention. They did intervene, with the folk remedy, and it stopped. Another long pause. "Send me the samples. Overnight. I need to examine them myself. Already packaged. They'll be on the morning bus."
Dr. Ashford's voice had lost its certainty. "This doesn't make sense. The chemistry doesn't support this outcome." "I know, but it happened anyway." After the call ended, Vincent sat back in his chair. He thought about Gretel Steinhardt's face, the quiet certainty, the knowledge earned through experience rather than learned from books. Maybe, just maybe, the experts didn't know everything. May 19th, 1946. Day 7. Silas walked his fields at dawn same as he'd done every morning for a week. Checking, watching, hoping. He knelt beside the tagged plant he'd been monitoring, the one that had shown 30% damage on day 0. The damage was still there, brown and dead. But something new had appeared overnight. Small green shoots, emerging from the stem just above the damaged areas. Fresh growth. New leaves, tiny and perfect, unfurling from nodes that had looked dead 3 days ago. The plant was regenerating. Silas touched the new growth with trembling fingers. The tissue felt firm, healthy, alive. He moved to the next plant. More new growth. Green shoots appearing all along the stems. By afternoon, Callum confirmed the same phenomenon across both farms. New growth everywhere. The plants weren't just surviving, they were recovering. Vincent Morris came out again, stood in the field with his mouth literally hanging open. "This is impossible," he whispered. "And yet," Silas said, gesturing at the vibrant new growth surrounding them. Vincent knelt, examined the new leaves under a magnifying glass, took more samples. His hands shook slightly as he sealed the specimen bags. "I need to call Dr. Ashford. He needs to see this himself." "You do that," Silas said. That evening, Vincent made the call. Described the new growth, the recovery, the impossible regeneration. Dr. Ashford was silent for a long time. Then, "I'm coming out there. I need to see this with my own eyes." "When?" "Day 14. If the recovery continues, if these plants actually produce viable tubers, I'll come examine them personally." "You think we're lying?" "I think something is happening that contradicts everything I know about late blight pathology. And when observation contradicts theory, theory must be revised. That's how science works." Vincent hung up and sat in the darkness of his office. 3 universities had said impossible. The leading expert had explained why it couldn't work. And a German prisoner's grandmother had been right anyway. May 24th, 1946. Day 14. A black car pulled up to the Crawford farm at 9 in the morning. Dr. Theodore Ashford emerged carrying a leather case full of testing equipment. He was tall, maybe 60 years old, with grey hair and wire-rimmed glasses. Every inch the distinguished academic. Silas and Callum greeted him at the field's edge. "Gentlemen," Dr. Ashford said formally, "I'll be frank. When Vincent sent me samples showing healthy tissue regeneration from plants that should be dead, I thought there was a laboratory error. But he assured me the samples came from your fields. I needed to see this myself." "Be our guest," Silas said. They walked through the fields together, all 400 acres. Dr. Ashford examined plants, took soil samples, measured new growth with calipers. He checked leaf tissue under a portable microscope, scribbled notes in a leather-bound notebook. He worked in complete silence for 3 hours. Finally, he straightened up, removed his glasses, cleaned them slowly with a handkerchief. "This shouldn't be possible," he said quietly. "But it is," Callum replied. "Yes, it is." Dr. Ashford put his glasses back on, looked at them both. "The blight damage hasn't just stopped spreading, it's been compartmentalized. The plants have somehow isolated the infected tissue and generated new growth from healthy stem nodes. I've never seen recovery this complete from late blight at this stage of infection." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "The new growth shows no signs of infection. The leaf tissue is healthy. The cellular structure is normal. These plants are producing viable photosynthetic material. They should be able to complete their growth cycle and produce tubers." "So the crops are saved?" Silas asked. "It appears so. Against all scientific expectation, yes." Callum couldn't quite hide his satisfaction. "Will you tell us the folk remedy was superstition?"
Dr. Ashford met his eyes directly. "No, Mr. Brennan. I'll tell you I was wrong." He turned to Silas. "Science without observation is just theory. You observed results I said were impossible, which means my theory was incomplete. That's not a failure of science. That's science working correctly. We form hypotheses based on current knowledge. We test them. When observation contradicts theory, we revise the theory." "So what happened?" Silas asked. "Why did it work?" "I don't know yet, but I intend to find out." Dr. Ashford looked toward the barn. "I understand this treatment came from a German prisoner. I'd like to speak with her." Gretel was brought from the barn. She stood before the distinguished professor in her work clothes, hands rough from labor dirt under her fingernails. The contrast was stark. Academic authority meeting practical knowledge. Dr. Ashford addressed her in careful German. "Fräulein Steinhardt, I owe you an apology. I dismissed your treatment as folklore based on theoretical chemistry, but your results are undeniable. Would you be willing to explain the method to me in detail?" "Everything your grandmother taught you," Gretel explained. "The proportions, the application technique, the timing, her grandmother's observations about when it worked and when it didn't, how the knowledge had been passed down through generations, refined through trial and error, preserved because it saved lives." Dr. Ashford took notes furiously. Pages and pages. When she finished, he said something that shocked everyone. "Your grandmother was conducting empirical agricultural chemistry without knowing the terminology. No formal training, no laboratory equipment, no scientific education. But the methodology was sound. Observation, testing, refinement, documentation. That's science, Fräulein Steinhardt. The fact that she called it tradition and wrote it in a notebook instead of publishing papers doesn't make it any less valid." He turned to Silas. "I'd like your permission to test this treatment in controlled university trials, compare it against our current fungicide recommendations, document the mechanism of action, understand why it works." "You'll need to ask Gretel," Silas said. "It's her knowledge." Dr. Ashford turned back to her. "Fräulein Steinhardt, would you permit us to study your grandmother's method, to understand the science behind it, to share that understanding with farmers everywhere?" Gretel considered this carefully. "If you share what you learn, if farmers everywhere can use it, if you do not lock the knowledge behind patents or universities, then yes." "You have my permission. You have my word." Dr. Ashford returned to Iowa State University that afternoon and assembled a research team immediately. They recreated Gretel's treatment in laboratory conditions, tested it against late blight in controlled environments, analyzed the chemical interactions at the molecular level. What they found astonished them. The combination of ash lime and sulfur created a complex alkaline environment that did three things simultaneously. First, the sulfur provided direct antifungal action, but not through the mechanism they'd expected. At high pH, the sulfur didn't kill spores through direct toxicity. Instead, it oxidized into compounds that disrupted the spore's ability to penetrate leaf tissue. Second, the lime raised the leaf surface pH to levels that were indeed hostile to fungal growth. Dr. Ashford had been right about that, but he'd been wrong about it neutralizing the sulfur. At extreme alkalinity, the sulfur transformed into different active compounds. Third, and most remarkably, the wood-ash minerals triggered something called systemic acquired resistance in the potato plants. The potassium and calcium didn't just strengthen cell walls, they actually activated defense genes that the plants possessed but normally kept dormant. The ash essentially taught the plants to fight back. The milk's role was equally unexpected. The lactic acid bacteria didn't kill fungal spores, but they created a biofilm that protected the treatment from being washed away by rain. And they produced organic acids that paradoxically worked with the alkaline environment to create localized pH gradients that the fungus couldn't tolerate. Dr. Ashford spent 3 months documenting every aspect: the chemistry, the biology, the mechanism. In September 1946, he published his findings in the Journal of Agricultural Science. The paper was titled Traditional Bavarian Anti-Blight Treatment, a case study in empirical agricultural chemistry and systemic acquired resistance in Solanum tuberosum. In the acknowledgements he wrote, "Special thanks to Margareta Steinhardt, whose practical knowledge preserved what academic theory nearly dismissed. This research demonstrates that scientific understanding must remain humble before the accumulated wisdom of traditional agriculture." The paper caused a sensation. Within 6 months, farmers across Iowa were requesting information about the Steinhardt method. Within a year, it had spread to Wisconsin, Minnesota, Nebraska, and North Dakota. Within 2 years, it was standard practice across the potato-growing regions of America. September 1946. Harvest. Silas Crawford's fields yielded 195 bushels per acre. Not the 220 he'd hoped for before the blight, but far more than the 0 the university had predicted. Callum Brennan harvested 188 bushels per acre. Together, the two farms produced 68,600 pounds of potatoes, worth $4,800 at current market prices, $0 to $4,800 because a German prisoner had refused to stay silent. The harvest celebration was held at Silas's farm on a warm September evening. Both farming families attended, all 20 German prisoners who'd helped apply the treatment, Vincent Morris, Dr. Theodore Ashford, who'd driven from Iowa State specifically for the occasion, and Gretel Steinhardt, guest of honor. Silas stood before the assembled group, raised his glass. 3 months ago, I thought we were finished. The university told us nothing could save the crops. Science told us to give up. Modern knowledge told us to accept defeat. He looked at Gretel. But one woman told us she knew a way. That woman had every reason to stay silent. She was a prisoner, a foreigner, a woman in a profession dominated by men. She could have watched us fail and felt no guilt. It wasn't her farm. It wasn't her country. His voice grew stronger. Instead, she offered help. She shared knowledge her grandmother had preserved through generations. She asked for no payment, no recognition, no reward. She just said, "I know a way." He raised his glass higher. Gretel Steinhardt saved our farms, but she did more than that. She taught us that wisdom exists outside universities, that enemies can become friends, that the greatest gifts come from the most unexpected sources, that sometimes the person everyone dismisses holds the answer everyone needs. The crowd erupted in applause. Gretel stood, tears in her eyes. "Thank you, Mr. Crawford. But I did only what my grandmother taught me. Share what you know. Help who you can. The earth provides for everyone, but knowledge must be shared." Dr. Ashford stood next. "Miss Steinhardt, on behalf of Iowa State University, I want to formally apologize for my initial dismissal of your treatment. I was wrong. Not wrong to apply scientific thinking, but wrong to assume that scientific thinking was the only valid kind of knowledge." He paused. "We're establishing a new research program, the study of traditional agricultural knowledge, methods that have survived generations but haven't been properly documented or understood by modern science. We need someone who understands both the old ways and can help us learn why they work." He looked at Gretel directly. "We'd like to offer you a position, research specialist in traditional agricultural knowledge. It comes with a salary, a place to live, and a pathway to American citizenship if you want it." The barn went silent. Gretel stared at him. "You are offering me a job at a university, a research position, working with our agronomists to document and validate traditional farming methods from around the world. You'd be perfect for it." Silas spoke up quickly. "And until you start, you're welcome to stay here. Work on the farm if you want, or don't. Just stay." Gretel looked around the barn, at the faces of people who'd been her captors 4 months ago, who'd become something else, friends, family. Germany was rubble, her village destroyed, her family scattered or dead. She had no home to return to, but here in Iowa she'd found something unexpected: purpose, respect, belonging. "Yes," she said quietly, "I will stay." The barn erupted in applause and cheers.
Gretel Steinhardt began her work at Iowa State University in October 1946 as the first research specialist in traditional agricultural knowledge. Her office was small. Her title was unofficial at first, but her impact was immediate and profound. She worked with Dr. Ashford's team to document not just her grandmother's potato treatment, but dozens of other traditional methods she'd learned in Bavaria. Crop rotation patterns that prevented soil depletion, natural pest deterrents using companion planting, soil amendment techniques using local materials, water conservation methods that predated modern irrigation. Each technique was tested rigorously, validated through scientific method, refined, published. The program expanded rapidly. By 1948, the university was recruiting traditional farmers from across Europe and Asia, Polish vegetable growers, Italian orchard keepers, Dutch dairy farmers, all of them bringing knowledge that academic agriculture had dismissed as folklore, all of them proving that old methods, when properly understood, were often superior to modern techniques. The potato treatment became known formally as the Steinhardt method in agricultural literature. Informally, farmers called it the Bavarian solution, or sometimes simply Gretel's gift. By 1950, late blight outbreaks in Iowa had decreased by 70%. The Steinhardt method prevented most infections before they became severe. By 1960, variations of the treatment were used across the United States and Canada. By 1970, it was standard practice worldwide. Millions of tons of potatoes saved, thousands of farms protected from bankruptcy, all because a German prisoner refused to stay silent, all because 2 Iowa farmers were desperate enough to listen. 1952, Webster County Courthouse. Gretel Steinhardt became an American citizen. Silas Crawford and Callum Brennan stood as witnesses at her naturalization ceremony. The judge asked her why she wanted to become American. "Because America gave me a chance," she said simply. "In Germany, I was just a farmer's daughter. Here I am a scientist. Here knowledge matters more than family name or university degrees. Here I can help people." She received her citizenship papers with tears streaming down her face. Silas hugged her afterward. "Welcome home, Gretel." The years passed. Gretel's traditional agricultural knowledge program grew to 12 full-time staff members. They documented farming methods from 43 countries, published a quarterly journal, hosted annual conferences, trained extension agents to work with immigrant farmers who brought their own traditional knowledge to American soil. Gretel herself became a minor celebrity in agricultural circles. She gave lectures, wrote papers, consulted with the USDA on sustainable farming practices, but she never forgot where it started. Every spring she visited the Crawford farm, walked through the potato fields with Silas, checked for blight, discussed the season ahead. One spring afternoon in 1975, Silas asked her a question. "Do you ever regret not returning to Bavaria, not trying to find your family?" Gretel thought about this for a long time. "Sometimes I miss the mountains," she said finally. "The village where I grew up. The farm my family worked for 7 generations. But that place is gone. The war destroyed it. The people are scattered or dead." She gestured at the Iowa fields surrounding them, green and healthy, growing strong. "This is my home now. These are my people. This is where my grandmother's knowledge matters. This is where I belong." 2002. Iowa. Gretel Steinhardt died peacefully in her sleep at age 90. She'd lived in Iowa for 56 years, never married, never returned to Germany, devoted her life to preserving and sharing traditional agricultural knowledge. Her funeral was attended by hundreds, farmers whose crops she'd saved, scientists she'd trained, students she'd taught, government officials, university administrators, and Rosalind Crawford, now 71 years old, who gave the eulogy. Gretel Steinhardt arrived in Iowa as a prisoner of war. Rosalind said, voice strong despite her age. She left this world as a pioneer of sustainable agriculture. In between, she revolutionized how we think about farming knowledge and the value of tradition. Rosalind paused, composed herself. "My father always said Gretel saved our farm, but she did more than that. She saved our understanding of what expertise means. She proved that wisdom exists outside universities. That innovation can come from unexpected sources, that the person we overlook might be the genius we need. Her voice broke slightly. Iowa is better because Gretel Steinhardt refused to stay silent. American agriculture is stronger because she shared what she knew. And all of us are richer because she chose to help instead of holding back. Gretel was buried in the Webster County Cemetery next to Silas Crawford, who had died in 1995 at age 96. Her headstone reads, Margareta Steinhardt, 1912 to 2002. She shared knowledge that saved thousands. Knowledge Has No Borders 2024, Iowa State University.
The Gretel Steinhardt Center for Traditional Agricultural Knowledge celebrates its 78th anniversary. The center has documented farming methods from 127 countries, published over 2,000 research papers, trained 3 generations of agronomists to respect and study traditional knowledge. The original potato treatment is still taught, still used, still saving crops around the world. A plaque in the center's entrance hall tells Gretel's story, the prisoner who became a pioneer. Students read it every day. Some see an interesting historical anecdote. Others see something more important. That expertise exists everywhere. That the person society overlooks might hold crucial knowledge. That sometimes the genius everyone needs is standing right in front of them. They just have to listen. The Steinhardt method is still used today. Modern versions are refined, but the core principle remains unchanged. Because Gretel Steinhardt's grandmother was right. The 3-part blessing works, all because one German prisoner refused to stay silent when she saw crops dying, all because 2 Iowa farmers were desperate enough to listen, all because knowledge doesn't care about nationality or credentials or degrees, it just works. This is the story of Gretel Steinhardt, the woman who proved that wisdom exists outside universities, the genius who everyone almost dismissed. If this story moved you, share it. Tell someone who needs to hear it, because there are hundreds more stories like this. Stories of people who changed the world by refusing to stay silent. Stories that deserve to be heard. Until next time.